New York's JFK airport was louder than usual that morning. A restless mix of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, crying babies, and the low hum of thousands of lives crossing paths without ever really seeing each other. Ava Johnson stood near gate 27, holding a paper cup of coffee she had forgotten to drink. She wasn't nervous about flying, and she wasn't late. What she felt was familiar, heavy, and quiet, the feeling that came whenever she stepped into spaces where people like her were not expected to be. She wore simple clothes, clean sneakers, a grey sweater, and no visible jewelry. Nothing about her screamed money or power, and that was exactly what people saw first. Ava had learned long ago that the world often judged before it listened. She checked her boarding pass again, first-class seat to a New York to San Francisco. She had booked it herself, paid for it herself, earned it herself. The flight mattered. At the other end of it waited a boardroom, a table of investors, and a deal that could change not just her life but the lives of hundreds of people who worked for her company. She took a breath and stepped forward when boarding was called. The gate agent scanned her pass and paused. Ava noticed the pause immediately. It was small, just a second too long, but she had seen it hundreds of times before in stores, hotels, meetings, and offices. The agent looked up at her face, then back at the screen. Her smile tightened. "Ma'am, can you step aside for a moment?" Ava nodded and moved to the side, watching as the agent continued boarding other passengers, many of them walking past with the same first-class label printed on their tickets. No one else was stopped. When the line thinned, Ava approached again. "Is there a problem?" she asked calmly. The agent sighed. "It seems first class may be overbooked. We might need to reassign you." Ava kept her voice steady. "My seat is confirmed. I checked in early." The agent didn't answer right away. Instead, she gestured toward a nearby security officer. "Let's just double-check everything," she said, loud enough for people around to hear. Ava felt eyes on her, curiosity, judgment, suspicion. The security officer examined her boarding pass, scanned it, and handed it back. "She's fine," he said. "Seat 2A," the agent's lips pressed together. "All right," she said shortly. "You can board. No apology, no explanation." Ava walked down the jet bridge with her shoulders straight, reminding herself why she was here and what she had built. Inside the plane, the air smelled of leather seats and recycled air. Ava turned left toward first class, passing polished wood panels and soft lighting. As she reached row 2, she stopped. A woman was already sitting in her seat. The woman was white, mid-40s, dressed in a beige coat, scrolling through her phone with a glass of champagne resting on the tray table. Ava checked the seat number again, then spoke gently. "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat." The woman glanced up briefly, her eyes flicking over Ava, then back to her phone. "No, I don't think so," she said dismissively. "I always sit here." Ava felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, but kept her tone polite. "My boarding pass says 2A. The woman finally looked fully at her, eyebrows raised. "Maybe you should ask the flight attendant," she said. "Economy boarding is usually further back." Ava hadn't said anything about economy, but the implication hung in the air. A flight attendant approached, a practiced smile on her face. "Is there an issue?" Ava explained the situation and handed over her boarding pass. The attendant looked at it, then at Ava, then at the seated woman. "Ma'am," she said to Ava, "could you step aside for a moment while I sort this out?" Ava hesitated. "I'd prefer to stay here. This is my seat." The attendant's smile tightened. "Please don't make this difficult." A few nearby passengers were watching now. Ava felt her heart beating harder, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of having to prove herself again and again. "I'm not making it difficult," she said quietly. "I just want my seat." At that moment, a man in a pilot's uniform appeared from the cockpit. Captain Reynolds was in his late 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen decades of skies and storms. "What's going on?" he asked. The flight attendant quickly explained, framing it as a confusion. Ava handed the captain her boarding pass. He studied it carefully, then turned to the woman in the seat. "May I see yours?" The woman huffed, but handed it over. The captain compared the two. "Ma'am," he said to the seated woman, "your seat is 14C. Her face flushed. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "I was upgraded." The captain shook his head. "Not on this flight." He turned to Ava. "Ms. Johnson, I apologize for the delay. This is your seat." Ava nodded, relief and vindication washing over her. As the woman gathered her things angrily, muttering under her breath, the captain didn't stop there. He looked at the flight attendant and said quietly but firmly, "We need to talk after boarding." Then he addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be departing shortly." Ava sat down, hands folded in her lap, feeling both visible and invisible at the same time. As the plane took off, Ava stared out the window at the shrinking city below. Her mind drifted not to the meeting ahead, but to the long road behind her. She thought about her mother Denise, who used to come home late with sore feet and tired eyes, who taught Ava how to read contracts and people, who told her again and again that being excellent was not optional in a world that would look for reasons to doubt her. Ava remembered studying computer science at a state university. Often the only black woman in the room, being mistaken for administrative staff. Being told she was surprisingly articulate. She remembered the nights she slept in her office when she launched her startup, the rejections, the investors who never called back, the ones who smiled politely and passed. She also remembered the first yes, the first contract. The first time she hired someone and realized her dream was becoming real. Halfway through the flight, a senior flight attendant approached Ava with a different demeanor. "Ms. Johnson," she said softly, "on behalf of the crew, I want to apologize for earlier." Ava appreciated the words but didn't rush to accept them. "Thank you," she replied. "I hope this doesn't happen to someone else." The attendant nodded. "It won't," she said, though Ava wasn't sure if that was a promise or a hope. When the plane landed in San Francisco, Ava was among the last to stand. As she reached the exit, Captain Reynolds was waiting. "Ms. Johnson," he said, "I wanted to say something before you go." Ava met his eyes. "I've been flying for over 30 years," he continued. "I've seen how quickly assumptions are made. What happened today wasn't right, and I've already filed a report. It matters." Ava felt a tightness in her throat. "Thank you," she said. "It does matter." He nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. Outside the terminal, the California air felt cooler, calmer. Ava's driver was waiting, holding a sign with her name. As they drove toward downtown, Ava checked her phone. There were emails waiting, messages from her team, updates on numbers and projections. She responded quickly, shifting back into the role she knew well. The meeting was in a glass building overlooking the bay, all steel and light and polished surfaces. Inside the conference room, 5 investors sat around a long table, most of them older, mostly white, all powerful. Ava had presented 2 rooms like this before. She stood at the head of the table, connected her laptop, and began. She spoke clearly, confidently, walking them through her company's technology, its impact, its growth, and its future. She answered questions without hesitation, addressing concerns with data and vision. As she spoke, she noticed something different. They were listening, not just hearing, but listening. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the investors leaned back and smiled. "Ms. Johnson," he said, "this is one of the strongest presentations we've seen this year." Another nodded. "Your company isn't just profitable," she added. "It's necessary." Ava felt a surge of pride, not just for herself, but for every late night, every doubt she had pushed through. After the meeting, as contracts were discussed and hands were shaken, one of the investors lingered. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Ava nodded. "How do you stay so composed?" She smiled slightly. "Practice," she said. He laughed, but there was respect in his eyes. That evening, as Ava returned to her hotel room overlooking the city lights, she finally let herself sit down and breathe. The day replayed in her mind, from the gate to the seat to the boardroom. She thought about how easily the outcome could have been different if she had stayed silent, if she had stepped aside, if she had accepted less than what she was entitled to. The next morning, her phone buzzed with notifications. Someone on the flight had recorded part of the incident. It was online now, shared thousands of times. People were talking about it, debating it, arguing about bias and privilege and accountability. The airline issued a public apology and announced an internal review. Ava didn't comment immediately. She watched from a distance, aware that the story was bigger than her, but also deeply personal. Later that day, she released a short statement. She didn't attack anyone. She didn't demand outrage. She simply said that dignity should never be questioned based on appearance, and that systems improve when people speak up. Weeks later, back in New York, Ava stood in her company's office, looking out at her growing team. New faces, different backgrounds, shared purpose. She thought about the seat on that plane and what it represented. Not luxury, not status, but access, recognition, fairness. She knew there would be more moments like that in her life. More doors to push open, more assumptions to challenge. But she also knew she was no longer walking alone. Her story, like so many others, was part of a larger movement toward being seen, heard, and respected. And as she turned back to her work, Ava felt grounded in the knowledge that she belonged in every room she entered, not because someone allowed her to be there, but because she had earned her place every step of the way. Ava's life did not slow down after that incident. If anything, it accelerated. The days following the flight were filled with interviews, internal meetings, strategy calls, and quiet moments where she processed how something so small a seat number had exposed something so large. She never allowed the story to define her, but she didn't run from it either. She understood that visibility carried responsibility. When younger employees at her company approached her privately to say they had experienced similar moments in their own careers, Ava listened carefully. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to give advice. She remembered how often people wanted quick solutions without understanding the weight of the experience. Instead, she shared her own journey honestly, including the doubts she had learned to sit with rather than erase. Her company continued to grow, expanding its cybersecurity services into healthcare systems and public infrastructure. Ava was careful with every decision. She believed trust was built slowly and destroyed quickly. Investors respected her discipline, even when it meant slower expansion. She often thought about her mother during those moments, about the way Denise used to say that rushing was a luxury poor people couldn't afford. Ava carried that lesson into every negotiation, every contract, every hire. She made sure her leadership team reflected the diversity she believed made systems stronger. Different voices, different perspectives, fewer blind spots. One afternoon, months after the flight, Ava received an invitation to speak at a national technology conference in Washington, D.C. The event focused on innovation, ethics, and the future of digital security. She hesitated before accepting. Public speaking had never scared her, but she was wary of being reduced to a symbol rather than respected as a professional. Still, she agreed, deciding she would control her narrative by staying grounded in her expertise. When she stepped onto the stage weeks later, the room was packed. She spoke about algorithms, data protection, and accountability, weaving in the importance of building systems that didn't inherit human bias. The audience was silent, engaged. When she finished, the applause was long and genuine. After the talk, a young woman approached her, eyes bright, hands shaking slightly. She introduced herself as a computer science student from a small college. "I didn't think people like me ended up running companies like yours," she said quietly. Ava smiled, feeling the familiar mix of pride and responsibility. "They do," she replied. "And they will more often if you don't let anyone convince you otherwise." That moment stayed with Ava long after the conference ended. Back in New York, life continued its steady rhythm: early mornings, long days, late nights. Ava sometimes walked home instead of taking a car, enjoying the anonymity of the streets, the way the city held everyone without asking who they were or where they came from. She passed storefronts, overheard conversations, watched lives unfold in fragments. It reminded her that success didn't separate her from the world. It connected her to it in new ways. She thought about how many people carried quiet battles, invisible to others, and how easily those struggles were dismissed. The airline incident slowly faded from headlines, replaced by newer controversies, newer outrage. Ava expected that. The internet moved on quickly. What mattered more to her were the internal changes she heard had taken place. A former employee of the airline reached out anonymously to say new training programs had been introduced. That conversations were happening that hadn't happened before. Ava knew progress was rarely loud or immediate. It came in small, persistent shifts. One evening, Ava visited her mother in Chicago. Denise was older now, slower in her movements, but sharp as ever. They sat at the kitchen table, drinking tea. Ava told her the full story of the flight, the meeting, everything that followed. Denise listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When Ava finished, her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You did good," she said simply. Ava felt her chest tighten. "I was tired," she admitted. Denise smiled knowingly. "Being tired doesn't mean you're weak," she said. "It means you've been carrying something heavy." Ava realized then how much of her strength came from being allowed to rest in spaces where she didn't have to prove herself. As the years passed, Ava's company became a major player in its field. She turned down acquisition offers that didn't align with her values. She invested in mentorship programs, scholarships, and community tech hubs. She wasn't trying to be inspirational. She was trying to be intentional. She understood that systems outlived individuals, and if she wanted lasting impact, she had to help shape those systems thoughtfully. Sometimes, when flying for work, Ava still noticed the looks, the pauses, the assumptions. They hadn't disappeared entirely, but something inside her had shifted. She no longer internalized them. She recognized them for what they were: reflections of other people's limitations, not her own. She claimed her space without apology. She spoke when necessary and stayed silent when it served her better. She learned that power wasn't always loud. Often it was calm, consistent, and unyielding. On one particular flight years later, a young boy sitting across the aisle stared at her with open curiosity. He nudged his father and whispered something. The father smiled apologetically. Ava smiled back. When they landed, the boy approached her shyly. "Are you important?" he asked. Ava laughed softly. "Depends on the day," she said. "Why?" He shrugged. "You look like someone who decides things." Ava thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she replied, "but mostly I work hard." The boy nodded, satisfied, and ran back to his father. Ava watched them walk away, thinking about how early perceptions formed and how important it was to expand what children believed was possible. Late one night, alone in her apartment, Ava revisited the memory of that seat. She realized it had become a marker in her life, not because of the discomfort, but because of the clarity it gave her. It reminded her that dignity wasn't something to be requested, it was something to be claimed. She knew her journey wasn't unique, but it was hers, shaped by resilience, discipline, and the refusal to shrink. Outside, the city lights flickered, constant and alive. Ava closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and stood by the window for a moment longer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new moments where she would choose how to respond. She felt ready, not because the world had changed completely, but because she had learned how to move through it without losing herself. And in that quiet certainty, Ava Johnson found something more valuable than any seat, title, or headline. She found peace in knowing exactly who she was and why she belonged wherever she chose to go.